What happened to our relationship with grinding gear games, fellow exiles? In the distant past, the original developers built their brand on community interaction. Path of Exile was a game officially owned and developed by actual game developers, that's true, but we, the community, gave plenty of insight into what we wanted to see in the game in addition to what we thought of it. And the amazing thing? The developers listened. They spoke with us. They participated in the community, from the official forums and Twitter to the extremely active Path of Exile subreddit. Discussions involved game mechanics, new ideas, potential buffs and nerfs, the lives of the developers, and really, how both the community and the creators could make Path of Exile the best game it could be. Fellow exiles, this isn't where we are today. I'd like to explore why that is and hear from all of you. What are your thoughts on the relationship between grinding gear games and the community who plays its core game, Path of Exile? This is my second go on this video. The first was too bleak. I don't like being bleak. I like being positive. However, this is a bleak topic. I've broken down PoE into 4 related eras for the purpose of this video. 2010 to 2013, the era of Inception. 2013 to 2019, the era of hyper interaction. 2019 to 2023, the era of implosion. And 2023 to the future, what's going to happen? All right, let's visit where we used to be, where we are now, and what the future might look like for our relationship as a community with the developers of our favorite game, Path of Exile. The idea for Path of Exile wasn't cooked up in a corporate shop by a bunch of executives out to make a tremendous amount of money. Rather, it was built in a garage by a trio of like-minded lovers of the action role-playing game genre. They were the quintessential ARPG players, people who loved to slay monsters, get loot, and create more and more powerful characters. These 3 dudes, Chris Wilson, Jonathan Rogers, and Eric Olofsson, crafted grinding gear games, then began Path of Exile. However, they took a very different approach to the development of their indie game. During all its phases, alpha, beta, and post-launch, they interacted heavily with the community. At the game's inception, they immediately began talking with the tiny community. They created a forum for discussion and traveled to various cons to show off their budding product. The developers spoke excitedly to potential players, young and old, eager to show off their passion project that they thought would turn into a juggernaut. They were right. Chris Wilson, the smart lad, even took to Reddit and posted development videos all about Path of Exile to various gaming subreddits. Any questions people had, he answered. Any qualms people had, he tried to address. This approach was unique in the gaming industry, now and then. The developers were few in number, but ready to talk with others about their game. Instead of making promises and grand gestures, telling people about the game, they showed them. They were among the first to craft short and long-form YouTube videos about their game, then post them and discuss their intricacies with the community. All of these videos were accompanied by developer insight too, usually by Chris Wilson. This gave absolutely anyone interested in Path of Exile far more information about both the game and its passionate core developers than any other news post. Can you imagine Blizzard making a Build of the Week video series? Moving into the next phase, the era of hyper interaction from 2013 to 2019, grinding gear games built upon this. It was their brand, unique to them and their growing game, Path of Exile. This may have been a live service game, but the developers were as committed as possible in ensuring their community was happy, and they were always staying true to the game's vision. During this time period, communication between dev and community only increased. A hyper-vigilant community manager, Bex, joined the Triple G team. Their presence across social media skyrocketed, and Bex quickly became a pillar of the community. She would enter random conversations, especially on the PoE subreddit, and post memes, development insights, cryptic messages, or even outright confirm highly anticipated changes. Other developers would join in on the conversation on Reddit too, answering technical questions and giving their input on the direction of the game. Everything was quite collaborative and civil. Most game announcements were even directly posted on Reddit and various other social media spaces by grinding gear games. Players flocked to these threads and passionately discussed the new updates and direction of the game. Chris Wilson also posted frequently on the PoE subreddit, thanking the player base for the continued support. During the biggest announcements, such as the 3.0 expansion that surprisingly added 6 new acts, GGG leadership was quite open about paying super close attention to the community response. It floored them, and they've said it was among the best moments in their entire lives. Everyone was so united in the joy of playing and making Path of Exile. However, interactions with the community weren't only used as hype or meme opportunities. If something went awry, Chris Wilson would usually make a post to address the greater Path of Exile community on Reddit, as that's where the majority of the most active players were gathered. Many of these posts spurred honest discussions from both sides, where GGG messed up, where the community saw the game headed, and how GGG were going to remedy their mistake or do a better job on implementation in the future. These were honestly refreshing to read. It's always great to see developers own up to a mistake and explain what happened. Most people, I'd posit, were appreciative and understanding like myself. They also use these spaces as opportunities to explain their development manifestos, where they wanted to see the game go and how they were going to accomplish it. These were sprawling posts filled with information. Even though some of them were quite controversial, they were always appreciated by the community, and I loved reading them as well. Around late 2019 and early 2020, everything began to shift for the worse. Succinctly, the relationship began to implode. It's time to enter the next era. As the PoE community grew larger with an influx in players after the massive PoE 2 announcement at ExileCon in 2019, I'd noticed a definite tonal shift in the developer and community relationship. Personal attacks on the most vocal members of the GGG development team, especially on the PoE subreddit, became more brazen. The two largest targets, of course, were Chris Wilson and Bex, as they were the ones who usually posted the largest pieces of news or responded to any community outrage. They were the faces of Path of Exile. Many of these attacks and threats were deleted, but some remained intact and showcased very loud portions of the community were getting more and more furious with GGG. Some players claimed they were intentionally ruining the game and verbally assaulted developers over it. Some threatened to take action with the developers. There's a lot of terrible stuff here that I'm not going to highlight in this video, but let me just say, the content was and is horrendous. Setting aside the fact that absolutely no one should be attacked as viciously as many of the PoE developers were and are, this is a game, and the developers obviously want it to succeed and its players to have fun. Anyone who believes the opposite is quite jaded. Sure, opinions on what fun is may differ, but no real developer wants to push present players away from their game. In mid-2021, the entire massive 3.15 Expedition patch sparked intense community outrage. This led to one of the final huge top-of-community interactions helmed by Chris Wilson, during which he went onto podcast after podcast to discuss the intent behind the changes. Succinctly, they'd been building up character power for more than a decade and knew they needed to tone it down. This was their stab at that. Some vocal parts of the community weren't hearing it though, and the temperature of the relationship truly began to rise even more so during the Expedition nerf era. Alongside this, in late 2020, Bex herself began posting less and less on the PoE subreddit. In lieu of her commonly posting, GGG created a community team Reddit account to post news and updates from. This was framed as Bex and other community managers needing to step away for other responsibilities, but I do believe a part of this was due to the growing vitriol some players had for these tremendous figureheads of the GGG cross-community interactions. This worked until mid-2022, when the community team account on Reddit went silent entirely. Why, you might ask? The Archnemesis Saga. Please do note, this is not actually Archnemesis League, but the one following it when the reworked mechanic was brought into the core game during Sentinel League. For anyone out of the loop, Archnemesis was essentially a revamp of how rare monster modifiers worked. They added a wild layer of complexity onto rares and, in lots of cases, made them much more difficult to deal with for a variety of character builds and players. This is when the community, especially on Reddit, went absolutely wild and began viciously and openly attacking GGG much more often. I remember logging into Reddit and seeing the bulk of the threads being pure hate threads on the company, the employees, and anyone remotely positive about the game. It was downright depressing. And regardless, Chris Wilson responded with a plan of action to address the overtuned Archnemesis monster implementation. This did not satisfy a decent-sized swath of the Reddit community, and the debauchery continued onward. Eventually, the anger simmered as Sentinel went on and rare monsters were addressed, but engagement with the community on Reddit and almost every other platform as well almost entirely stopped. Bex still spoke with some people on Twitter, in addition to giving little development insights there. However, the biggest platform for interacting with the GGG team essentially became a graveyard. That was until the next expansion, Lake of Kalandra, dropped, and Chris Wilson once again took to Reddit to explain some drastic changes and decisions made by the GGG development team that weren't properly communicated in the patch notes. Alongside a few answers from Bex, he tried to communicate with the PoE community entirely, taking all the fire. These alterations included sweeping changes to item drops, another complete rebalance of Archnemesis monsters, and a tad more. I'll focus on each of these when I create my dedicated video in the PoE 1 flashback series on Lake of Kalandra, so for the sake of this video, no Chris Wilson attempted to explain how this communication was missed, why GGG made these changes, and how they were trying to make it right. As per usual, players, many of them, attempted to destroy the reasoning, accused the developers of eviscerating Path of Exile entirely, and intentionally taking all of the fun out of the game. Of course, this was accompanied by threats of violence toward the developers, which was despicable. Chris Wilson's last piece of communication on this issue was on August 22nd, 2022. That was also his last post on Reddit. Bex's last Reddit post was on November 15th, 2022. The community team account went silent long before then. Occasionally now, a GGG employee might pop in for an easy question or to give a bit of mechanical insight, but that's it. What was once a bustling community rife with interactions with the talkative, helpful, and excited developers is now desolate. It's a true graveyard. GGG just doesn't talk with the community anymore, and it's sad to see. It's understandable why they've left these platforms. The threats and the vitriol are just too much to handle. Besides what we just saw at ExileCon and Chris Wilson's Q&A with Ziggy D every league, everything has faded into nothingness. Really? Is there any chance of this returning in the future? Okay, final Era time. Well, Bex is leaving Grinding Gear Games. Her last week is the week before the launch of Trial of the Ancestors, the week this video releases. Usually, she gives tiny teasers about new expansions on Twitter long before they release. She's the only GGG employee who does that. With her leaving, that might fade entirely. Perhaps the new head community manager will pick up her sword. It's unlikely Chris Wilson will return to post on Reddit, even if there's another debacle. There was silence during all of Sanctum, Crucible, and ExileCon. I'd expect that to continue. It's just going to be the league announcements and Ziggy D Q&A sessions for him. Other developers? Also likely staying away. People are too easily drawn to anger when interacting with them nowadays. Even on the official forums, this is the case too. I see the rage here a bit on YouTube in the comments as well. It's fascinating to read about how much of a GGG shill I am, questions about the status of my throat, or how far my back can bend forward or backward. They're not too creative, but I can see how, in excess, in far greater number, and with far more vitriol, they can affect people. I get why GGG is not interacting with the community as much anymore. And really, as far as discourse on places like Reddit goes, I think it's gone forever. The game, the community, it's too big now. That's why it was wonderful to see the panels at ExileCon and, most of all, the intimate interview between Subtractum, Chris Wilson, and Neon. It felt like the good old days of GGG, just three people chilling, talking passionately about games and Path of Exile. There were no gotcha questions, no seething anger, and even a few jokes and jests from the developers. It was so wholesome. I wish we could get back there. But the onus is on the community at large to make it happen. Especially the vocal, furious minority who caused this complete shift in communication. If something you don't like happens in an update, don't attack the developers, debate the ideas. If the game goes in a direction you're not a fan of, take a break or stop playing and come back later. Don't threaten the people who make the game. If you're listening to this and make those type of comments, just stop and think for a moment before posting. What's the goal? Is this just an outlet for your anger? What are you accomplishing? It's not much. It's only driving away the people who make the game you're so passionate about. Instead, if you'd like to be constructive, kindly discuss any flaws you see or poor directions or bouts of communication you're unsure about. It's unlikely enough of the people who write the inflammatory comments will hear or listen to this, but if it helps at least one person understand we're all on the same side here, it's worth it. I don't think we can return from the implosion of our lovely former relationship with GGG. However, in the moments when the community does get to speak with the developers, usually in the form of the big content creators among us, we should treasure and encourage them. Let's look favorably on the past, the 2010 to 2019 era, fellow exiles. Remember our mistakes during the 2020 to 2023 age and try to be kinder in the future. Even if we cannot ascend to our former glory, that's okay. Path of Exile 1 and Path of Exile 2 have long lives ahead of them. There's a ton to come. Maybe, just maybe, we can turn this around. Us individual exiles can make a small but meaningful difference in the end. Let's all work together toward a better future. Huge shout out to all these fellow exiles who directly support the channel via Patreon or a YouTube membership. You are among the most unhinged exiles among us. If you'd like to see more videos, like, subscribe, and share this video with your own exiled friends. You can even join our Discord server, the link's below. I'm on Twitch now a bit too. Check Talkative Try out there, or dive into these juiced up videos on your screen. Every minute you watch helps the channel grow. To all those who've watched until this ultimate moment, let's build this community back. Tala Moana.